Welcome to Season 2 of You and Me Kid, a podcast about starting and raising a family on your own, where I speak with other single moms, those still considering, and experts in relevant fields to give you a real sense of what the day-to-day experience of solo parenting looks and feels like. So wherever you are in the process, I hope this podcast provides some support, helpful info, and most importantly, humor. Thanks so much for listening. Now let's get to it. On today's episode, I'm talking to my dear friend, Ashlee. Ashlee is a NICU and oncology nurse. She works a lot with babies and is also a cancer survivor. So her path to single motherhood has had a couple bumps in the road, but she is well into her pregnancy now. So we talk about the considerations around single motherhood, how she's managed relationships through this entire process, as well as what it really feels like to want something this badly for so long and have to fight really hard for it. Ashlee is a lovely human being and has such an incredible perspective on this process, and I can't wait to share our chat with you. Let's get to it. You and I feel like, have had so many different evolutions of kind of why we've connected. We met because we both worked at an amazing nonprofit called First Ascent that runs adventure sports programs for adults with cancer. You serve as a program lead as well as a medical staffer on those programs. And so we met way back in the day. You know, obviously have been friends and have reconnected over this kind of new, super fun single mom path. I actually don't know this, so I'm interested to know the answer to this. When did you start thinking about doing this on your own? What options did you consider?
So as you know, I'm also a cancer survivor, and I very much started thinking about possibility or the not possibility of having children after I went through cancer treatment. And I went through my treatment when I was in high school, and it was back in early 1999. And so at that point, nothing, as you know, nothing was out there to preserve your fertility. There were no options given to patients at that time. If there was, it was very new, and docs were not going to halt or delay your treatment just to have the potential for you to preserve your fertility. Was not an option. So the first time I started thinking about fertility was in my early to mid 20s. I had a serious boyfriend at the time. I broke up. And then I was about 26, I think, when I first saw the first fertility doctor. And that basically was me just being like, hey, a doctor had told me at some point recently that I could possibly not have children. I could start menopause at 29, 30. I just want to know my chances and what do I need to do? What should I be thinking about? You know, I feel like I don't want to have the pressure of having to find a man, but right now I'm feeling that pressure, and what I just need to know more information. So that was the very first time I met with somebody, and I was living in Seattle at the time, and I think I was exactly 26 when I met with that person. And I think they left me feeling optimistic about everything and saying there's not, 100% sure that you'll go into menopause early. These are just information over time. We're still developing, post chemo and radiation and things like that, and what could happen. So that's the first time that I really started to think about fertility. And then when I was 30, 31, I was living in Chicago, and again found myself single and started thinking, oh gosh, I talked about this 4 or 5 years ago, but maybe I actually need to do something about it. And so that's the first time I decided. I contacted the fertility clinic. I think it was one of the Chicago hospitals, and went through the process and decided to go through with egg freezing for the very first time. At that point, nobody told me the numbers. Nobody told me what 1 egg versus 8 eggs versus 18 eggs meant in the freezing process. And so I was perhaps a little naive to it all. And I had my eggs frozen, but they only actually collected 7 total eggs, 3 of which were fully mature. So those numbers, as we now know, what's the percentage? 5 to 10% chance of having a baby with each egg. So that is very low numbers. And I didn't realize how low it was until I had a friend coworker I was working with, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I just froze eggs. And I was like, how many? Oh, I froze 26." And I was like, "What?" But at the same point, as you know, it like kind of helped relieve a little of the stress and anxiety off my shoulders, knowing I had something preserved out there. And so I just went about my business for the next couple of years, just trying to find a man, you know.
When you were going through that, I try to be super open as much as people are comfortable about the financial piece of this, because I think it is such a big deciding factor on when you start, what options you pursue. Can you just explain a little bit about what you do for work and if any part of your treatment was covered or how the financial piece kind of has played out for you?
Right. So I think initially, I know my first go around, I think I paid for all of the drugs, but my insurance at the time, I was living in Chicago, was good enough that it paid for the majority of all the clinic fees were all paid for it and covered by it. I believe at the time, Illinois did have some insurance coverage as far as fertility went. But like I said, nobody followed up with me after that to say like, hey, do you want to go through this cycle again? Hey, your numbers don't look so great. Like, hey, nobody said any of those things to me. And I know that I paid all of the cost of the drugs out of pocket. And so that was, I don't know, I think at the time they were saying it would come out to about $6,000 to $10,000. And I think that was about what it came out to, somewhere in the eights or something. But I definitely paid that all out of pocket the first go around, and then restarted all of my fertility preservation idea in 2020 is when, and really started it in 2021, but started rethinking about the idea of, hey, you're in your late 30s. You're not in a relationship right now. Like, what are you going to do? Being a mom has always been something that's been on my horizon. And I work in pediatric oncology. I'm a nurse, and I've always worked with kids, and I love kids, and I love watching families, and I get emotional about it because I just do. But yeah, I just have always pictured myself having a family. And the idea of not being able to have a family. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I certainly get it. So you got going pretty early, I think, because of your cancer diagnosis and having those discussions a lot earlier than most people. I think you froze your eggs probably quite a bit earlier than other people did too. So you were way ahead of the game, which is great. And then in 2021, you started the process of actually maybe trying to get pregnant. Obviously, COVID, I'm sure, affected that a little bit. So where are you in the process now?
Well, so I will just give a little background, right? So and you can do whatever you would like with this, but my background is that in 2021, I kind of got involved, started working with a clinic in the area, and very much was just on the path of, oh, I should just get more eggs frozen. And so I was just going to do egg freezing. And then the doctor that you had recommended actually to me said, hey, actually, your chances are better if you freeze embryos as far as in the long run be having a successful pregnancy, given all the percentages. And he was really great with giving all the facts. And so I kind of started on that path officially with him probably at the end, I think it was December of 2021, did my first embryo freezing and was able to freeze one embryo at that time, which given I know like your numbers, I was excited to have one, but also knew that it was not a lot, but it could very well be more. But I was happy to have one, and then went through a couple cycles of fertility, just like egg freezing. Ended a relationship I was in, and then decided, you know what, like I'm just going to try one more time to see about the embryo. If I can freeze, if I'm able to freeze one more, then it would double my odds in my brain. And so I went through that one more time last December, and then started the whole process. Had a little bit of medical issues in the middle due to my history. But after much discussion this summer, started everything back up again in October and had a successful transfer. And I'm probably going to cry, but I just went today for my 7-week ultrasound, and I am 7 weeks pregnant, and I am so excited. I'm amazing. Just like blown away.
Yeah, I mean, it's so amazing. I think this goes back to something that I've talked about a lot on the podcast, which is these numbers become a huge part of this process if you do IVF. I'm sure in the adoption process, like the waiting and the paperwork is the big lift, right? But the numbers when it comes to fertility treatments, whether you're doing IUI or IVF, become this thing that is so heavy and stressful. And all you want is like bigger numbers. And at the end of the day, I had one embryo and I am pregnant. You put in your first embryo 7 weeks ago, you are 7 weeks pregnant and you have another embryo left. And so by all intents and purposes, if we had thought that 2 or 1 wasn't enough and we let ourselves over the course of the past year, 2 years that we've been in this process, be really sad about that number, we, I think, would have done ourselves a disservice. And so I just want to stress that, like, you get to choose what you stress out about or what you don't. And like, if I can give anyone any advice about this process, it is like, trust your gut about which next decisions you want to make. If you want to do multiple rounds, if you don't, if you can afford it, if you can, but don't get these numbers every few weeks, every few days, and let them take you on an emotional roller coaster because you just don't know.
You just don't know.
My soapbox. That's my little soapbox for IVF. I do want to back up to one thing, which was you use donor sperm, correct?
Correct.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. As you know, this season I partnered up with California Cryobank, the #1 sperm bank in the US. California Cryobank ships to over 40 countries and has one of the largest and most diverse selection of donors out there. They are offering my listeners an amazing deal for season 2 that gives you free access to their level 2 subscription, which lets you check out baby and adult photos of the donors. To use this code, visit cryobank.com or click the link in the episode description and use my promo code YouMeKid, YOUMEKID, for a free level 2 subscription to their donor catalog. California Cryobank has helped tens of thousands create the family of their dreams, and hopefully you're next. Now, let's get back to it. How did you pick your sperm bank and your donor?
So I chose the sperm bank. I went with Seattle Sperm Bank. I chose that sperm bank in particular because I had friends, actually through this mutual organization that we worked for together, had friends that had become pregnant successfully through this sperm bank. And so it just kind of came with good recommendation. And so there were at least 3 different new moms that had used sperm from there. And so that's why I went with it. I did also just briefly look at the other one to see what kind of options were out there. And I know there's several sperm banks out there and some of them provide different information than others. I did agree with you that I really liked being able to hear a voice recording and kind of get a little idea of the sperm donor that I chose based on that. I will say my only trouble that I had was you choose one, and I know like you had given great recommendation advice of like choose your top 5, but then you go to choose number 1 and he suddenly has no sperm available. Then you go to 2, suddenly has no sperm available. So I think I ended up with my 3rd choice, but I'm happy with it. And I remember being so stressed out in the beginning and talking to you about this as well. What if I choose the wrong one, or how do I know which one to choose? And I agree with you that in the end, it doesn't matter, because in the end, I'm 7 weeks pregnant and I'm so excited to meet my baby. And it doesn't matter who the sperm donor was because they're my baby.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Exactly. It feels like, I think for me, and it sounds like for you as well, it's like I just needed to feel comfortable with the choice. And I felt like if my child picked up the phone to this person, that's the only way I really measured it. But at the end of the day, like I really just kind of needed sperm and needed to find a way to like help my little person come into the world. And
yeah.
And I fully believe that like my daughter is not like half the donor, half me. Like genetically, yes, that is the case. But like 1 + 1 does not equal 2 in this case. My kid is completely her own person. I am never going to know the difference between my daughter with one donor and my daughter with a donor I didn't pick. I'm never going to know. And it literally does not matter. And so I would say just going with your gut on it a little bit is the way to go, and picking more than one for sure, because they go fast. We interviewed Courtney Maddox from the Seattle Sperm Bank in season 1 and really dove in deep on kind of the specifics of sperm donors, what the qualifications are, what the eligibility is like. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it if you're going through the sperm donor process, because she is so helpful, and also really outlines all the resources that exist at Seattle Sperm Bank, and I think would exist at other cryobanks as well, for folks who are like, I just need someone to talk me through this and help me navigate the right choice. And it seems overwhelming, but after it works, it's like kind of it's a non-thing, which is so bizarre to say. I think about it sometimes that it will go from being a non-thing to a thing when we get closer to my child being able to understand the situation and us talking about it a lot more, and maybe her asking questions about the donor, especially as it moves toward her being 18. But that's 18 years from now, and I'm going to cross that bridge in 18 years.
I know that you had mentioned about like adoption and those kind of options. And I had thoroughly thought that through, because I have my closest cousin, it was adopted. So I've kind of been keeping my just like radar out on his kind of experience as an adult, and what feeling like not knowing who your biological parents is and what that meant for him, and if at all it impacted him. And ironically enough, just in the last like year or so, his biological family, like his biological mom, reached out and found him. And so it's interesting to hear kind of how that worked. And he's now, in his late 30s, yada, yada. But it is interesting to hear somebody going through that kind of from the other side of things, and like what that could mean for my future baby, or my baby now. But, but yeah, I think it's always been something that's been on my mind, and adoption is always an option. But yeah, I don't know. It's always something that I had thought of. Yeah. The other piece that I did think of just a few moments ago was I did have a coworker that I worked with who, when I kind of was starting going through things, she said, "Oh yeah, I donated eggs many, many years ago." She's like, there's a child of mine running around there somewhere, or a young adult. She's like, and I'll never know them, but it's kind of cool to know that there's a kid of mine out there. And I was just like blown away by that, because I've never met anybody that donated, whether it be sperm or eggs. I just hadn't directly met anybody. And I was so blown away by her positive attitude about it all. And that really helped me to feel less worried about it and more connected to the idea of using a sperm donor.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I want to ask you about one part of your process, because I don't know if you're unique. I haven't talked to a lot of the other folks that I've interviewed about this, but I do know that you've been in multiple relationships since starting this process. And I want to just get your perspective on kind of how open were you with those boyfriends about the fact that you were pursuing this, and what was that conversation like? Were they excited? Like, I think a lot of folks feel like they're picking between partnership or pursuing single motherhood. And maybe some people are. That's certainly my reality. But like, well, for now, I'm picking between single mother and partnership.
Right.
But I certainly know a lot of folks who are pursuing this who are still in relationships, or meet people while they're pregnant, or a myriad of other things. So I'd love to just kind of hear like what those conversations were like.
Yeah. So the very first, I was with a man, and we had like just started a relationship, but I was already kind of starting the process. And this was back in 2021. We had been together for about 5 or 6 months, and he knew I was going through all of this. And I was open with him about it, but he had a daughter of his own. And so I was open about it, but he also wasn't as interested in it, because he was dealing with so many outside factors at the time. Fast forward a year and a half, and we're no longer together. And I will say it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster, because there was at one point when I was trying to go through a egg freezing cycle, and they had to stop the cycle short because they didn't have enough eggs. But then the embryologist, whoever on the other end of the line, said, "Oh, but if you have a partner, this is a great time to try and get pregnant." And so I did pose that, just like, like how do you kind of walk that line with a significant other that you've only been with for, 10 months or whatnot. So that was kind of a line that I did walk. And obviously it didn't go the direction of pregnancy. And then I will fast forward now to the spring of this year. And I went through a mock transfer and uterine biopsy. And then due to my past medical history, had some medical stuff come up that I had to halt everything because I had been hoping to get pregnant in May of this year and delay it by 6 months. And I met him in May. He and I are still going strong. And I will tell you that I was not planning on doing this, but posed the idea to him to come to my appointment today. And he came and he was so supportive. And yeah, he has been so supportive. And I've just been honest with him from the front, like, this is what I'm doing. And I've already made these decisions and I want you to be a part of it. But I also want to give you the option to walk away. And that's kind of how the last few months went. And then today he was like, stop telling me that I have an option to walk away. I'm in it,
Wow.
And so for me, that was really huge.
Oh my God, big day you had today.
Yeah.
Okay. So walk me through that a little bit. I had the immense honor of coming to your embryo transfer. Which, having had a friend of mine at my transfer, it was so fun to be on the other side. It's also crazy that we used the same doctor. So got to see my doctor and watch the whole thing just from a different side of the medical table. And I do very well remember those first few weeks and feeling, I think, the most anxious in my entire pregnancy of just like, because you couldn't feel the baby yet. And just being like, oh my God, is this real? I've waited so long for this. It feels completely surreal. And I needed proof. Like I needed constant proof. And the wait between those initial appointments felt like an eternity. So how have you been feeling in these first 7 weeks, physically, emotionally, and what was today like?
So after the transfer, I think those first 2 weeks, as you said, were so long. And I did what you shouldn't do, but I did start taking pregnancy tests.
I take full responsibility for this decision. I think I fully just told you to hack the system because I hacked the system. And I'm so glad you did.
You definitely were the person that told me that. So I started taking it like day 6. It was like barely pregnant, if anything. And then, as you had said, it felt like maybe it got a little darker every day. But that did give me a little hope. And I know that it's different for everybody and it might not be pregnant. It might not show up at pregnant for several days and that's okay too. But I was so nervous and it did calm my nerves a little bit. And then I had my first blood pregnancy test lab maybe 12 days. And that one came back positive and you're so excited. But then they say, oh, but you have to wait 2 more days and make sure that it doubles. And you're like, wait, I have to wait 48 more hours. So I feel like I'm pretty good about pushing stress away. But I will say that probably that week. So maybe not the first week after everything, 'cause there's no way to find out. But that second week was really just waiting on pins and needles for the pregnancy test. And then for that second pregnancy test to like have doubled and to be successful and for them to, because I remember sitting in the office getting my lab drawn for that second one and the lab techs being like, oh my God, congratulations. And I just was thinking, I don't know yet. Like don't congratulate me quite yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I'm nervous. And so I think in the last several weeks, been trying not to think hard about it and trying not to stress about it because there's nothing that I can do.
That's the best attitude to have.
Yeah. But I will say I was more nervous, I think, than I thought today. I thought, oh, I'm not nervous at all. And then she took my blood pressure when I got there. And I was like, my blood pressure is never that high. I must be nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But everything went well. And then you'll go back. The next one's 12 weeks. Right?
The next one's 9 weeks.
9.
So
okay.
I'll go back in 2 weeks and then do another, I think it's another ultrasound. And I don't know if they do more labs. And then they transition you, at least what it makes it sound like, that then transition you back to your OBGYN.
Which is
So,
super surreal, I feel like, for folks like us who spent so much time with these fertility teams. Um,
hmm
I remember going to the office the very last day for my last like blood work and ultrasound, and I've been coming to I've been coming to that office for 2 years, just like you had. And I like left the office and walked to the parking lot, and I was like, oh my God, that was so anticlimactic. I was like, I should have brought them. I remember thinking so clearly, like, I should have brought them like some donuts or like flowers or something. And then the next immediate thought was, well, I gave them $100,000. So I think they're like good on the donuts, but I was so grateful, but it does just become such a part of every day, the check-ins and the calls and the appointments, that all of a sudden you're like, you go to a normal OB, like a normal person, and the appointments are so far spread out, which also felt really alien to me after going in so often during the IVF process. Well, that is so exciting. I know right now the focus is probably just like enjoying being pregnant, as you should, but have you thought at all kind of about the day-to-day and your job? Like, is there maternity leave with at your hospital? Kind of what do you think that is going to look like when this little person comes?
yeah, I have thought about it, but I've also tried. I feel like I've had so many negative things that have occurred in the last couple of years that I tend to be an overly optimistic person. And so I've been trying to tame my optimism a little bit. Um,
I
trying to
had the
subdue
same
it a little
problem.
bit.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm like, oh, you should. And then I back up. Nope, nope, you shouldn't rush ahead and think about that yet. I had another coworker at work the other day say that she was pregnant and she's at 9 weeks. And I was thinking, gosh, that seems so early to tell everyone you're pregnant. Like, I don't even think I'm going to tell my whole family until 12 weeks. So I have thought about it. As a nurse, you don't get maternity leave. You just use your vacation time.
Yeah.
I also have had people be like, oh, as soon as you know you're pregnant, you need to sign up for daycare. And I'm like, but I don't want to jinx anything. It's so hard to balance being optimistic, but then trying to be careful with my optimism. I know you understand that. It just,
Fully,
that to me is
fully. Yeah.
so difficult because I want to think I'm pregnant. But then, like, the last several weeks leading up to this first ultrasound, I've been like, but are you pregnant? Like, we need to make sure about this, you know?
I would love to say that it like the fear doesn't go away, but I mean, I felt relief, the actual relief the day my kid was born. I mean, I think there was a big jump at the 12-week mark. There was a big jump at the 20-week mark. When you're going to start to, I think, feel them, that helps a little bit. But like, I think you make a great point, which is when you've gone through this process, whether or not it's with a partner or not, there's just fear that's in the process, and there's heartbreak that's in the process. And it's almost like it programs you to assume that something might go wrong because we've now been told for 2 years, like, well, you're in your 40s and these are the statistics. You know, it just gets like, you can really get caught up in that. And I had a hard time kind of shaking that even once I was pregnant too, because I kept remembering everything that had been shared with me. And I wish I hadn't remembered it, but I think, you know, it did get easier for sure as things went on, but the like fear and the excitement they were just a part of it all the way in. And now I have a live little person running around, and the fear and the excitement are both there in tandem too, just in a totally different way. So you just gotta take it day by day for sure. And I will tell you, those 2-week breaks between appointments are not as bad, but when they become 5 weeks, I definitely had times where I'm like, I just want to go in. Can I just go in? Or I have a friend who's a midwife, and I was like, do you have like a fetal monitor? Can we just check in on the baby? Which would have made me feel good, but you'll get through it for sure. Patience is a big part of this stage.
I got a lipid transfusion today, which apparently they do at 7 weeks, which I didn't know because I probably haven't been thinking this far ahead.
Yep. Very weird little, yeah. Like a milkshake infusion. That's what it looked like to me.
Exactly. And I met the woman, the FET nurse that I have been emailing with for the last year. I finally met her today. I didn't even realize it was her until the end. And she's like, oh, you'll get an email from me. And I was like, wait, are you Molly? And she's like, yes, I'm Molly. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that it was you. And to put a face was really amazing. But she did make a comment like about, because I said I was very anxious in the beginning. I was not anxious. I said I was feeling nervous today prior to the appointment. I said, apparently, according to my blood pressure. And she said, well, started to say that it was, going to get easier as the time went on. And then I said, oh, I don't know. I had a friend that said, well, welcome to the rest of your life. Like being nervous and being afraid that something is going to happen to your child. Well, welcome to the rest of your life. She's like, oh gosh.
I didn't feel that way. I definitely don't feel that way. Yeah, it's just a different, it's like it's a totally different ballgame. When they're in the world, it's like, I hope you don't fall down the stair. Like, it's just a different type of, I certainly don't think I have crippling fear every day, but those early stages of pregnancy, I was super nervous. And I think, I think it just comes with the program a little bit of folks who it's taken a long time to get there. So when is your due date?
July 19th.
Okay.
2024.
You're 2 weeks after my due date. What are you, I think as you said, you're probably just really enjoying it at this point, but what are you the most excited about when this thing that you've been talking about and thinking about now since technically you were 26, but really for the past 3-4 years is actually happening?
I think today is a really interesting day for me to have this interview because I'm just so overwhelmed with excitement, but nerves. And I've been thinking about it, but not thinking about like actually, because not knowing and not wanting to get my hopes up. I mean, I honestly just keep hoping that whatever this little one is inside me, that they are healthy and that they are happy and that I'm able to be a good mom. And that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited to meet my little one and I'm excited to hold my little one. I'm just really excited to be his or her mom.
Yeah.
So
what has your experience of sharing with people that you're pursuing this on your own been like? Have you gotten, for the most part, support? Have people asked questions or been dubious? Like, what has that been like for you?
I think for the most part, like given, like when you talk with younger generations, I think that most of the younger generations are very supportive. I think it's more our parents' generations and our parents' parents that are supportive, but just don't understand. Because perhaps, like I think my dad hasn't expressed it, but my mom is fully on board and she knows how much I want to have a baby. But I think my dad was just, he's, old school and like, well, you need a man and a woman and that's how you have babies. And so, but he's come around and he is fully supportive. And I did decide to tell both my parents when I got that confirmation pregnancy test because of all of the health things that have happened in the last year. They have known every step of the way of this last process. Initially, I was being a little bit less, exact dates of what's going on. And but now I feel like, they want to know. And so I'm going to tell them. But they've been good enough about not sharing any of the information with the rest of my family. But my dad has been really, really supportive. And so I do think that's just an interesting, like most people are supportive or at least outwardly supportive. I don't know what their internal opinions are. And I know that for my child, for our children, that it is going to be an interesting, as you mentioned earlier, an interesting hurdle in their lives and an interesting hurdle for myself too. And I thought about this even months ago, like how do you talk about the donor sperm, or if not, I have a man in my life, like how do I, like if this man, my boyfriend currently, like if we stay together long term, well, then I want him to be my child's dad, but if that doesn't happen, which, relationships end, then how am I going to express their sperm donor versus father versus I've thought about that and I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer yet. So,
yeah, I am hopeful. This again goes back to me just being a internal optimist, I think like you, but I was in Montana this summer hiking with some girlfriends who both have kids and they're in partnerships. And one of the one of the gals, her sister has a child who's transitioning. And she was telling a story about the child being in school and coming to school one day and just kind of telling everybody, announcing that she was now a he, and that was that. It was such a beautiful story to hear because the parents had obviously gone through quite a bit of kind of emotion and education around it. But kids, at least in this story, they literally were unfazed. Like they just, I think there is a new generation of kids that are growing up with this broad spectrum of an understanding of what a family looks like. One mom, two dads, grandparents, single-sex couples, friends who are transitioning, gender fluidity, sexual orientation and fluidity. Like I think there seems to be, at least even me watching some of the younger kids that I hang out with, just this awareness and open-mindedness, at least to all of it. And sometimes I laugh that I'm like, oh my God, my daughter may grow up where they're like, people literally don't care that she's donor conceived because they're like, okay, cool, like onward. Whereas maybe 20 years ago, that would have been kind of a tougher conversation. I hope that's the case. Who knows what the world's going to be like, but I hope it's the case that it's not something that she would get, teased about, or maybe some of the things that might have happened in the past when it was a little bit more of an anomaly. I don't know. Eternal optimist.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. I even have talked to some friends about it, who they are like, oh yeah, I know. I have a good friend who is a single mom by choice, and her son is now 10, and kind of hearing those stories and also hearing stories of like parents who are really proud to say that they have a daughter or a son, whomever it may be, that's a single parent by choice. And I think that that's really beautiful. And it provides, like you said, a little bit of optimism as, the world's always changing. And I feel like in a lot of ways, we've changed in really great ways in the last 10, 20 years, like you were saying. And I hope that it just continues to be more accepting of, people knowing that, there's many ways in which to have a baby, and it doesn't have to be a man and a woman. It can be in countless ways in which a baby is made, and it's still just as loved and just as beautiful.
Yeah. What have you're in healthcare, so maybe you had a little bit of a leg up on this process at the beginning, maybe not. As you were navigating it, because it's a lot to navigate, what helped you? Were there books? Were there articles? Were there doctors? Like, who did you turn to help kind of like bumper boat your way through the options, the decisions, the finances? Like, what was helpful to you?
I think it has been a very long road, to be honest, because there isn't a lot of, or there wasn't a lot of resources out there. It's becoming more known, and it's becoming something that now insurances are either accepting or denying, or now I like I had shared with you, which is something in particular to cancer survivors, but there are now ways in which to get your medications donated or funded, or different means of the process supplemented to help. And I think that has become a easier process. But I will say that, like, for me, you and I got quite a bit closer because I leaned on you, having been someone who's already experienced it or was in the start of experiencing it. Because I believe I told you about one of the organizations that was donating money or donating meds and how you could obtain that, and vice versa. And so I think along the way, kind of leaning on friends who have maybe walked that path, and maybe it doesn't even have to be someone you know, but leaning on those resources of hearing those experiential journeys that each person has been on, and hearing whether it be positive or positive in a different way, or hearing about the various sperm banks that were used, or their own experience working with one clinic versus another clinic versus this doctor versus that doctor, and hearing about the different means in which they gained support helped me along my journey, and helped me in making my decisions. I think a lot of it is personal. I mean, it is you deciding what you want to do and what you want and how you want to treat your body and what your hopes and dreams are for your future. But I also think leaning on other people is also really important, or maybe even just leaning on one person, whoever it might be, but whoever that resource is that can kind of, like you said, help bumper you along the way.
Yeah. That's why I started this podcast, is I just had a lot of questions and I didn't know anyone who was going through it. And I'd spend so much time kind of sorting through doctors and options, and God, the finances take forever to like slowly but surely piece together what this whole thing is going to cost. And you don't know, because once you're on the path, you don't know how many of this or how many of that you're going to need. And so the financial piece certainly is super tough as well. So I think a lot of people I speak to are trying to solve for problems that don't exist yet, of like, well, what if, what if this happens, or, what if I meet someone when I'm in the process or something. And I always kind of tell people like that you will look at these options very differently when you're on, like in the experience. Like you're going to look at a decision you're going to have to make about an embryo in 6 months very differently, because you're going to have already gotten 30 different lab results that are going to, like, in a nuanced way, change your perspective about what you want. And it's going to test how much you want something, or can you afford something. Like you just kind of have to like inch your way forward and just make the next best decision, I feel like.
I just want to add one more thing.
Yes, please.
That really struck me through this process is I was trying to get sort of some opinions, and met with an MFM, a maternal fetal medicine doc. After hearing my story and my medical history, he said, honestly, my first choice for you would be to use a surrogate.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And when he told me that, I just felt emotional and crushed. And he said, of course, my second option for you would be X, Y, and Z. And of course, you can go ahead, but like this would be what I would tell you. I didn't realize how badly, I don't think, until that moment, I wanted to carry a child.
Yeah.
Or I wanted the opportunity to attempt to carry a child. And I think we all realize that within ourselves at a different point, and maybe it's a different moment in your life, and maybe it's because this happens or this happens. And for me, that was the moment I realized to what depth I very much wanted to try and carry my own child.
Yeah.
And how much that meant to me.
That's so fascinating. I think that's such a good example of just kind of some of the things that you're hearing, even if they're bad news, might change your perspective. And I had a similar experience. I had a doctor tell me I was infertile, which was completely inaccurate. But I do really, I am partly grateful for it, because I think it launched me into overdrive of like, okay, these numbers don't look very good. I'm not going to wait a couple years. Like I am moving forward at lightning speed, which then took 2 years to make a baby. But had that person said, oh, everything looks great, you're good, I might have waited, and I might have run into some other challenges. So I am, in the moment, I was certainly not grateful. I was rageful, but I think it did kind of kick me into overdrive, which I'm grateful for. Okay, so now that you are officially pregnant and are just super hopeful for the next 7 months, 8 months actually, going well, and everybody's staying healthy. If you came across somebody who was thinking about this and they were on the fence or wondering if this was right for them, or if it was something that they were capable of doing as a human, just putting you on the spot, what would you recommend to them?
During my entire course, since the moment that I started on this path, realized that you need to make decisions based on your hopes and your dreams. And I would say, if you have any inkling of a desire to have a baby, start that now. As you just said, the process is long and it is hard, and there are ups and there are downs. But you know, and you will know. And if you don't know today, maybe you'll know tomorrow, or maybe you'll know the next day. Like I said, it might just be something small. It might be what a doctor says to you. It might be what a friend says to you. And you're going to hear something, and it's going to strike a chord inside you. And you're going to go, I want to have a baby, or I want to have at least tried to have that baby. And to me, that was why I decided to go ahead with everything this fall. As I said, I know that I'm going to regret not having ever tried. And so for me, I want to live without those regrets, and I want to have made that decision to try. So my advice would be sit in your heart for a little bit and think about what, in the end, when you look back on your years, like what will have provided you with a little bit of hope and a little bit of strength, knowing that you tried, knowing that you took that leap, knowing that you took what seemed scary at the time, and made it into something beautiful, however that turned out, and make those decisions based on what your heart's telling you. That's what I did.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that this process too is a series of like 1 billion small steps. So because you meet with a fertility doctor, it doesn't mean you've decided you're going to have a baby and this is the best path for you. Because you get blood work to find out what your baseline, is. It doesn't mean you need to move forward. Like you get to make a decision to move forward or stop at any time. And holy smokes, there are more half steps than I ever even realized going in.
And even once you make that decision to start, it's still another 3, 6, 9 months later that things can actually start. So just making that first appointment, don't be scared to go to that first appointment, because that first appointment is the first of many. And it might give you a sense of what direction you want to go or in what direction you don't, but it doesn't hurt to make that first appointment.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. For more information about the podcast or me, go to youandmekidpod.com. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you or your company are looking to jump into the podcast world, now is the time. The Plug Agency is here to connect you to the full power of podcasting. You just record and leave the rest to us. The people are listening and want to hear from you. theplug-agency.com. That's theplug-agency.com. Click the link in the episode description for an exclusive offer.